choices shape the market, our society, and our quality of life. That's why Euroconsumers helps millions of people in their daily choices, providing simple solutions to complex problems. Euroconsumers is a cluster of organizations, a network of people, a group established to protect consumer rights and well-being that brings consumers and companies together in transparent relationships of trust that respect their independence. Our deep understanding of products and consumption gives consumers a credible expert voice worldwide. We bridge the gap between buyers and manufacturers, between supply and demand. And in this digital age, we create opportunities for all parties to come together in constructive dialogue, partnering to build a future of better products and services. Euroconsumers has the power of a global group that believes humanity can develop, grow, and change for the better, and that we can promote this by uniting millions of consumers in strength and speaking responsibly for them while simultaneously engaging in relationships of trust with responsible, sustainable companies.
Hello, it's good to be back. Our next presentation will address the integration of Brazil in the global economy as a factor in sustainability. Not everyone is aware of this, but the Brazilian economy is very closed. It concentrates its exports on a few primary products such as beef, soybeans, sugarcane, and has very high customs barriers for imports. And the question we're going to ask today, the very important question for Brazil, is could a more open economy be more sustainable? We have two speakers to address this question. The first is, excuse me, just 1 minute, Ana Paula Repesa, who is Deputy Executive Secretary at the Brazilian Ministerial Board of Foreign Trade and Investment, also known as CAMEX, from the Ministry of the Economy. She has graduated in Business Administration from the Federal University of Minas Gerais in 2000, with an MBA in Foreign Trade and International Business from the Fundação Getúlio Vargas in 2002, and a master's degree in international management from the University of London in 2018. She has been working in Brazilian foreign trade for the past 2 decades, having worked for public and private institutions such as Gerdau, Açominas, Apex Brasil, and as a special Secretariat for Strategic Affairs of the Presidency of the Republic. She has been invited professor of the graduate programs at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas and the National School of Public Administration, author of books and articles in the areas of internationalization of companies, foreign trade policies, and international negotiations. To accompany her, we have Ricardo Mendes, who has a bachelor's degree in international relations from São Paulo Catholic University, with a master's in international relations from Cambridge University. He's a managing partner at Prospectiva, a leading consultancy firm. He is responsible for the company's international operations, having as main focus the expansion of services to Latin America and the operation in Washington, D.C. He specializes in strategic planning, public policy analysis, regulations, and international negotiations. And Ricardo is going to take over from me now. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you, Matthew. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Just wanted to start thanking Proteste and the organizers of the Euroconsumers International Forum for this invitation. Very happy to be sharing this panel with Ana Paula Repesa, who's an old friend of ours. We've known each other for quite a long time. So it's really a pleasure to be here today. And to get started, Ana, I would like to ask you a question. Well, according to international political economy theories, okay, consumers, they benefit from open markets and free trade. We all know that. However, protectionist interests, they tend to prevail over consumer interests when it comes to trade negotiations, when it comes to policy making. These groups tend to be more organized. They tend to have more efficient lobbies than consumer groups and other groups that benefit from free trade do. So I wanted to ask you, what role do consumer groups play in the trade policy making in Brazil? And how can they be more active? How can they be more engaged in these discussions?
Okay, thank you very much, Ricardo. Thank you, Matthew, for such a gentle introduction. It's very good to be here, and I'd first like to thank Proteste and Euroconsumers for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here, and I hope we can have a good conversation today about these issues that are so relevant both to Brazilian economy, but also for the world economy as a whole. Well, this is a very good question, Ricardo, because, you know, in Brazil, Brazilian Consumer Protection Code has just completed 30 years this year. So it's relatively new when you compare it to other countries, especially when we are talking about more developed economies. And also trade policy discussions are also a relative novelty in Brazil. The first time we really were talking about it in a serious ways and trying to understand the impacts of trade policy in the Brazilian economic development, it was also 30 years ago when President Collor started to open our economy. So those two areas of knowledge are very new both to Brazilian policymakers and also to Brazilian society. And when we try to bring those two areas together and we try to merge them, we find both a very strong, a very large room for us to discuss and to improve the knowledge and the understanding of this convergence. But also we face some barriers because this is something that not everyone knows and not everyone is used to discuss. But for the last 2 years, I'd say, we have been having more participation, and we are trying to foster. Do you hear me well? Because my connection is kind of. Do you hear me well?
We hear you well.
Okay, thank you. So for the last 2 years, Brazilian government have been trying to bring consumers' perspectives even more into trade policy discussions. You know that one of the pillars of economic liberalism is empowering customers, is giving consumers the power of choice, and this power of choice involves opening the Brazilian market to foreign suppliers in such a way that our consumers may have access to better goods, to different goods, to more choices, more quality, and better prices. So this is a very strong pillar of our discussions nowadays when we are talking about Brazilian trade policy. As you may know, the decisions in Brazilian trade policy are undertaken into committees. CAMEX, the Brazilian Ministerial Board of Foreign Trade and Investment, is precisely the body that congregates many committees to discuss the various issues of trade policy. And what I call the core committee of CAMEX, which is GSEX, where the main decisions are made. The current configuration of GSEX presents two strong supporters of consumers' perspectives. And the presence of these two governmental bodies that bring the perspectives of consumers into trade policy has already proved to be a very relevant a feature of this year's trade policy, this administration trade policy. These two bodies, one of them is the Secretary for Advocacy Competence from the Ministry of the Economy, and the other one is CADI, which is the Council for Economic Defense from the Ministry of Justice. Having these two bodies sitting at GSEX table and discussing the impacts of trade policy decisions into consumers' well-being and consumers' wealth has proved to be a very relevant way to address consumers' issues and consumers' concerns in trade policy. But these are, as I say, these are institutional representations of consumers. And how can we have consumers themselves playing a bigger role and being more active in CAMEX? There are two ways. First one, and this is also very new, has just been approved last week. CAMEX has a multi-stakeholder committee called Private Sector Advisory Council, CONEX, and regimentally, this advisory council, which role is to support GSEX decisions, is to support the governmental committees in their decisions. This committee has 2 seats devoted and reserved to consumer representatives. Proteste, for instance, is one of these representatives, and we are very happy, and I'm sure that Proteste will be able to bring many interesting perspectives to our discussions. And last but not least, I believe that the most relevant tool for consumers to influence trade policy and to have their voices heard, despite of the strong lobbies and the strong corporativist lobbies, is to take part in the public consultations that CAMEX and other governmental bodies undertake. For an example, we have just had a public consultation regarding the tariff reductions for toys, and we have had a massive participation of consumers. Over 74% of the respondents were consumers. And of course, that the final decision was that it's important to reduce tariffs on toys. So the tariff reduction schedule will begin on December 1st, and the participation of consumer was pivotal for us to reach such a result.
Well, it's very interesting to hear. Ana Paula, I've worked with trade policy for more than 20 years, something like that, and I do see a lot of progress and a lot of opening on the government side. It's been quite a transition that Brazil has gone through in the last few years, and it's really good for consumers, and it's great for society as a whole. Okay. Let's shift to another question that I had related to sustainability. Okay, so sustainability in the broad sense of the term. Okay, this is a major concern for governments, business, and many segments of society, as we know. Okay, how can we correlate sustainable development goals and free trade? Would you be able to give us some examples applicable to Brazil?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. Well, before asking this question, I'd like to remember John Elkington's concept of the triple bottom line, the sustainability triple bottom line. When we are talking about sustainable development, we are talking about economic development, social development, and environmental development. So when we are discussing this broad concept of sustainable development, we here in Brazil, we are addressing and we are thinking about those three axes of Elkington's triple bottom line. The first one, the economic axis, I believe it's the more obvious one, because international evidence and theory show that countries that open to trade have more economic development. We have seen a recent study back in 2018 that showed that from 57 countries that faced liberalization programs, all of them, after a decade of liberalization, they have up to 5% decrease in their inflation rates. And this is huge, because this is a way to implement economic reforms without tackling directly into economic programs, but tackling with trade policy programs. So when we are talking about inflation decrease, we are talking about lower prices, and we are talking about a more wealthy population, especially those that are more disadvantaged, because for people who have low salaries, every decrease, every percentage point decrease in inflation and in prices means a lot in their purchase power. So this is very important, and I can affirm that this is a legacy that the current administration in Brazil would like to leave. That having a free market means a better economic development, lower prices, and better purchase power, higher purchase power to Brazilian population, especially those in the most disadvantaged segments. When we are talking about the social axis of sustainability, of course, I have to bring up gender issues. The role of women in economic, and the role of women in society has been more discussed than ever, and we are very pleased to see that Brazil, for instance, is engaged, has already signed the Mercosur European Union Association Agreement, which has a sustainable development chapter that tackles gender issues as well. But we are also engaged in other international trade negotiations that are really focused on gender issues. For instance, the Mercosur-Canada trade agreement. And when we talk about how free trade can improve women's lives, I'd like to address a very recent study from the World Bank, which discusses the role of trade in promoting gender equality. It has been launched, I believe, in last August or September. And the study proves in a very rational way that once free trade often represents increase in wages and more economic development, especially for developing economies, women population, the women in those countries are even more positively affected, because usually women receive lower salaries. They are devoted to less value aggregated activities, labor activities. So when you have the impacts of free trade in that economy, the positive effects, the positive externalities, they are felt even strongerly by the women population, because they usually get more jobs, better jobs with better salaries, and this has a very this represents a very perenne impact in the society as a whole. So on the social axis, I have no doubt to say that engaging into more trade negotiations and trade and having an open trade will benefit women and other disadvantaged segments of society. And last but not least, of course, we have to talk about environment. And Brazil is traditionally a very strong supporter of many multilateral commitments regarding environment and climate change. And although some people may criticize some recent positions from authorities, I believe this is a tradition that Brazil will not break. We understand the relevance of international commitments and multilateral commitments about environment, and we understand that free trade and sustainable development cannot be excludent options, but on the contrary, they must work together.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. On this last topic you just mentioned on the environment issue, I was just having a conversation here with Matthew, with our moderator here before the panel, and how consumers in Brazil pay such high prices, for instance, for electric vehicles, for electric cars. And this is, I think, a very good example of how an open market can benefit and can promote sustainable development. Unfortunately, the cost of these vehicles in Brazil are still very high, partially due to the protectionism surrounding it, but we do hope to see this change in the near future. So, Ana, since you mentioned the Mercosur-European Union agreement, I would like you, if possible, if you can comment on the efforts that the government's making to ratify the agreement. And also, since we talked about sustainable growth and sustainability, how do you think Brazil and other Mercosur members can benefit from the sustainable growth perspective from this agreement?
Great, thank you. Well, before we talk about the ratification of the agreement, it's important to remember that Brazil was the biggest sponsor in Mercosur for the concretization of this agreement. Over the 20 years of negotiation, Brazil was always the country that was pushing our colleagues, our cohorts from Mercosur to move forward and reach the final test of the agreement. And this is very, very important because we understand that something that has been so well negotiated and so well linked to other perspectives of development cannot be will not be thrown away because of some views of somewhere or here or there. So nowadays, the current status quo is that the Mercosur is nowadays under the Uruguayan presidency. As you know, we have rotative presidencies every 6 months. I'm sorry. So we are under Uruguayan presidency now. As of today, Uruguay is the one leading the efforts of legal scrubbing, because this is the stage where we are at this moment. We are on the stage of legal scrubbing in such a way that the text can be sent to each of the countries' parliaments. different from European Union, where they have only one parliament that will ratify the agreement. In Mercosur, we have 4 parliaments, one of each country, one belonging to each country. But it doesn't mean that the agreement will only be enforced after the 4 countries from Mercosur ratify it. Once only a single country from Mercosur ratifying the agreement means that the agreement, and also having European Union ratifying from their side, it means that the agreement will be enforced. So we are very much looking forward for it. Once the tests are sent to the Congress, I'm pretty sure that in Brazil we won't face many resistance for this ratification, especially because the agreement was very well negotiated, and every position that we took to the negotiation tables on those 20 years were positions that were aligned with the Brazilian parliament. So I really do not believe that we will have trouble here to ratify it. And we truly understand and we truly believe that the Mercosur European Union agreement brings together a very strong and a very rational framework to address sustainable issues. Important to remember that the sustainable chapter on the Mercosur European Union agreement is not a binding chapter. It's rather this brings guidelines that companies and governments must follow, and I will link this with my in a few minutes. I will talk about our accession to OECD. And many of those guidelines that are inserted on the sustainable chapter of the Mercosur European Union agreement are also reflects OECD guidelines in sustainable development. So I truly believe this will bring together companies and governments in a way that we can increase even more the trade flows between European Union and Mercosur. It's very important for us, that as Matthew mentioned in his initial words, Brazil is a traditional exporter of basic goods, primary goods, but we are also moving forward on the value chain and adding value in some of those industries. And once we do that, and once we export, the more we export, the more our value chains are convergent to the best practices in terms of ESG. Because consumers nowadays, especially when we are talking about developed economies as European Union, consumers are very active, and they exert their economic power through their choices when they are purchasing something. So Brazilian companies know that not adhering to international best practices in sustainability mean that they are going to lose markets, and this is a very good pressure. This is a very good pressure that only benefits all the involved.
Very, very interesting to hear. I already mentioned here that I've seen a major transition in Brazil's trade policies, the process of trade policy making in Brazil in the last few years. There's clearly a drive for free trade in the country. And Brazil, all these rankings that you see in terms of trade liberalization year by year, Brazil has been ranking way up high there, which means that Brazil is pursuing, even though we don't have any major free trade agreement signed, Brazil is doing a lot unilaterally as well. So this is something we would be very interested in hearing from you. We understand that major transformations in a complex society like ours, in a democracy like ours, they can be very challenging. However, we do see the government making small but efficient, taking small but efficient measures to improve the business landscape in the country and promoting trade openness in Brazil. We'd be delighted to hear some of these measures. What are some of these measures from you?
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. Well, no one so many white hair. They have grown over the last 2 years. Well, when we talk about Brazilian trade policy, it's important to explain to especially to our colleagues in Europe, that different from the European Union, which is a perfect trade union. Sorry, not trade union. It's a perfect economic bloc, in the sense that all decisions are made in blocks. In Mercosur, Brazil is inserted in Mercosur, and in Mercosur we are in a unperfect trade union, in the sense that there are some decisions on trade policy that can be made solely by Brazil, but there are other decisions that only can be made with the agreement of all the members of Mercosur. So among the decisions that can only be made with the agreement of the 4 members of Mercosur, it's precisely our tariff schedule. So our common external tariff is something that if one decided to change, we have to do it in agreement with the other 4 members. Another thing that we can only do as a block is trade negotiations, international agreements that talk about tariffs and tariff reduction. We can only negotiate in block. So this reality, this landscape of the Brazilian trade policy, in sometimes limits us in some things, some initiatives that we would like to undertake. That's why maybe trade liberalization have not occurred or is not occurring in the speed that we would like to have, because besides tackling with all internal stakeholders, we also have to tackle with our member partners in Mercosur. So everything but tariffs may be decided solely by Brazil. And this is not this is not saying that, okay, so we cannot decide on tariffs, so trade liberalization is not going to happen. Trade liberalization means much in tariffs. We have, do you hear me well?
Yes, we lost you for a little bit, but you're back now.
Yeah, sorry. In that sense, we have Brazilian government, especially the Ministry of Economy, have been endeavoring many efforts towards that are not only tariffs, such as trade facilitation initiatives, regulatory convergence initiatives, multilateral agreements such as the government procurement agreement from the WTO, and maybe the more important initiative for this government, and it's like an umbrella initiative that defines so many other issues when we are talking about business and consumer perspectives and competition, is our potential accession to the OECD. I say this is the more relevant initiative of Brazil towards free trade, because adhering to the OECD guidelines, it will oblige us to first improve our business environment, which is crucial for investors to come to Brazil. which is crucial for Brazilian companies to get more productivity and get more competitive. So you see many areas of the current administration focused on the OECD guidelines in such a way that we can have this huge change. But especially when it comes to trade, I'd like to highlight these two initiatives, trade facilitation initiatives. Brazil is nowadays implementing many regulatory changes in the direction of reducing the burden over importers and exporters. We have reduced significatively the number of products that are subject of importing license, which we know that will reduce transaction costs for trade in a very relevant way. And we are also implementing all the commitments that we made back in 2013 on the trade facilitation agreement of the WTO. So these are some initiatives that are being undertaken under the government nowadays. But there is also an initiative that is not being undertaken in this current administration, and maybe this is the more significant one. Since we took office in CAMEX back in February 2019, we have not increased a single tariff in Brazil. Besides our external common tariff from Mercosur, we have a number of tariff positions that are free for the members to move up or move down the tariffs. And such positions are, of course, subject of lobbies to have more protectionism. And we are not doing that. So we are at least maintaining the current tariff level. And we are really looking forward for the moment when we are trying to reduce those tariffs.
That's great, Ana. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to share this panel with you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm going to hand over to Matthew again. Thank you so much. Hope to see you soon.
Okay, thank you very much. It has been great. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Hello. Thank you very much, Ricardo. Thank you very much, Ana Paula. I just want to say stay tuned, because we're going to have a very special session with Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University, who will be talking with the Italian internet pioneer and serial entrepreneur, Stefano Quintarella. You don't want to miss it. Thank you. We'll be back right after the videos in just a couple of minutes.